wanton of unbounded lasciviousness. Her he would frequently exhibit to the soldiers, dressed in a military cloak with shield and helmet, and riding by his side. To his friends he even showed her naked. After she had a child, he honoured her with the title of wife, in one and the same day declaring himself her husband, and father of the child of which she was delivered. He named it Julia Drusilla, and carrying it round the temples of all the goddesses, laid it on the lap of Minerva, to whom he recommended the care of bringing up and instructing her. He considered her as his own child for no better reason than her savage temper, which was such even in her infancy, that she would attack with her nails the face and eyes of the children at play with her. It would be of little importance, as well as disgusting, to add to all this an account of the manner in which he treated his relations and friends. As Ptolemy, King Juba's son, his cousin, for he was the grandson of Mark Antony by his daughter Selene, and especially Macro himself, and Ennia likewise, by whose assistance he had obtained the empire, all of whom, for their alliance and eminent services, he rewarded with violent deaths. Nor was he more mild or respectful in his behaviour towards the senate. Some who had borne the highest offices in the government, he suffered to run by his litter in their togas for several miles together, and to attend him at supper, sometimes at the head of his couch, sometimes at his feet, with napkins. Others of them, after he had privately put them to death, he nevertheless continued to send for, as if they were still alive, and after a few days pretended that they had laid violent hands upon themselves. The consuls having forgotten to give public notice of his birthday, he displaced them, and the republic was 3 days without any one in that high office. A quaestor, who was said to be concerned in a conspiracy against him, he scourged severely, having first stripped off his clothes, and spread them under the feet of the soldiers employed in the work, that they might stand the more firm. The other orders likewise he treated with the same insolence and violence. Being disturbed by the noise of people taking their places at midnight in the circus, as they were to have free admission, he drove them all away with clubs. In this tumult above 20 Roman knights were squeezed to death, with as many matrons, with a great crowd besides. When stage plays were acted, to occasion disputes between the people and the knights, he distributed the money tickets sooner than usual, that the seats assigned to the knights might be all occupied by the mob. In the spectacles of gladiators, sometimes, when the sun was violently hot, he would order the curtains, which covered the amphitheatre, to be drawn aside, and forbade any person to be let out, withdrawing at the same time the usual apparatus for the entertainment, and presenting wild beasts almost pined to death, the most sorry gladiators, decrepit with age, and fit only to work the machinery, and decent housekeepers, who were remarkable for some bodily infirmity. Sometimes shutting up the public granaries, he would oblige the people to starve for a while. He evinced the savage barbarity of his temper chiefly by the following indications. When flesh was only to be had at a high price for feeding his wild beasts reserved for the spectacles, he ordered that criminals should be given them to be devoured; and upon inspecting them in a row, while he stood in the middle of the portico, without troubling himself to examine their cases, he ordered them to be dragged away from bald pate to bald pate. Of one person who had made a vow for his recovery to combat with a gladiator, he exacted its performance, nor would he allow him to desist until he came off conqueror, and after many entreaties. Another, who had vowed to give his life for the same cause, having shrunk from the sacrifice, he delivered, adorned as a victim, with garlands and fillets, to boys who were to drive him through the streets, calling on him to fulfil his vow until he was thrown headlong from the ramparts. After disfiguring many persons of honourable rank, by branding them in the face with hot irons, he condemned them to the mines, to work in repairing the highways, or to fight with wild beasts, or tying them by the neck and heels in the manner of beasts carried to slaughter, would shut them up in cages or saw them asunder. Nor were these severities merely inflicted for crimes of great enormity, but for making remarks on his public games, or for not having sworn by the genius of the emperor. He compelled parents to be present at the execution of their sons, and to one who excused himself on account of indisposition, he sent his own litter. Another he invited to his table immediately after he had witnessed the spectacle, and coolly challenged him to jest and be merry. He ordered the overseer of the spectacles and wild beasts to be scourged in fetters during several days successively in his own presence, and did not put him to death until he was disgusted with the stench of his putrefied brain. He burned alive, in the centre of the arena of the amphitheatre, the writer of a farce, for some witty verse which had a double meaning. A Roman knight, who had been exposed to the wild beasts, crying out that he was innocent, he called him back, and having had his tongue cut out, remanded him to the arena. Asking a certain person, whom he recalled after a long exile, how he used to spend his time, he replied with flattery, "I was always praying the gods for what has happened, that Tiberius might die and you be emperor." Concluding, therefore, that those he had himself banished also prayed for his death, he sent orders round the islands to have them all put to death. Being very desirous to have a senator torn to pieces, he employed some persons to call him a public enemy, fall upon him as he entered the senate house, stab him with their styles, and deliver him to the rest to tear asunder. Nor was he satisfied until he saw the limbs and bowels of the man, after they had been dragged through the streets, piled up in a heap before him. He aggravated his barbarous actions by language equally outrageous. "There is nothing in my nature," said he, "that I commend or approve so much as my adiatrepsia, inflexible rigour." Upon his grandmother Antonia's giving him some advice, as if it was a small matter to pay no regard to it, he said to her, "Remember that all things are lawful for me." When about to murder his brother, whom he suspected of taking antidotes against poison, he said, "See then an antidote against Caesar." And when he banished his sisters, he told them in a menacing tone that he had not only islands at command, but likewise swords. One of praetorian rank having sent several times from Anticyra, whither he had gone for his health, to have his leave of absence prolonged, he ordered him to be put to death, adding these words, "Bleeding is necessary for one that has taken hellebore so long, and found no benefit." It was his custom every 10th day to sign the lists of prisoners appointed for execution, and this he called clearing his accounts. And having condemned several Gauls and Greeks at one time, he exclaimed in triumph, "I have conquered Gallo-Graecia." He generally prolonged the sufferings of his victims by causing them to be inflicted by slight and frequently repeated strokes, this being his well-known and constant order: "Strike, so that he may feel himself die." Having punished one person for another, by mistaking his name, he said, "He deserved it quite as much." He had frequently in his mouth these words of the tragedian, "Oderint dum metuant." "I scorn their hatred, if they do but fear me." He would often inveigh against all the senators without exception, as clients of Sejanus, and informers against his mother and brothers, producing the memorials which he had pretended to burn, and excusing the cruelty of Tiberius as necessary, since it was impossible to question the veracity of such a number of accusers. He continually reproached the whole equestrian order as devoting themselves to nothing but acting on the stage and fighting as gladiators. being incensed,